She was a ghost before she was a legend. They saw her as a whisper in the machine, a flicker on the periphery of their rigidly structured world. But when the mountain screamed and the protocols of men failed, it was the ghost they turned to. She did not ask for their faith. She did not demand their obedience. She simply became the only truth in a world of lies, the only stillness in the chaos. He asked her who gave her the authority to save them all, and with the calm of a geologic epoch, she told him the only answer that ever mattered. She had cleared herself. The air in Outpost Kaianos was a carefully manufactured lie. It tasted of recycled oxygen, and the faint metallic tang of ozone bled from overworked server racks. It carried the scent of chilled coolant and the faintest hint of human sweat, a constant reminder of the 97 souls entombed 3 kilometers beneath the fractured crust of a desolate moon. The silence was another lie, a thick blanket woven from the low subsonic hum of life support, the whisper of ventilation, and the rhythmic thrum of the geothermal tap that kept the abyss at bay. It was a silence that felt heavy, a coiled thing that pressed in on the ears and vibrated through the soles of boots on the grated Durasteel flooring. Elara Vance felt the outpost breathe around her, an intricate, fragile lung of plasteel and wire suspended in a universe of stone. She sat before a holographic display, her station tucked into an alcove that was more of a data nexus than a designated workspace. The light from the projection painted her face in shifting blues and greens, illuminating the intense focus in her pale eyes. Her fingers moved in the air, not touching the console, but interacting with the light, sculpting the data streams like a potter shaping clay. On the display, the world outside was rendered not as a void, but as a complex tapestry of geostructural data. Layers of schist, granite, and an orthosite were peeled back, revealing the intricate web of microfractures and stress conduits that riddled the massif. She was not looking at rock. She was reading a language, a history of pressure and time written in mineral and fault line. Her presence was an anomaly in the rigid hierarchy of Kaianos. She wore a simple gray jumpsuit, devoid of rank or insignia, her short-cropped dark hair utilitarian, her frame small and unassuming. To the Marines who patrolled the corridors, she was just another civilian specialist, an egghead lost in her numbers, another piece of esoteric baggage mandated by some distant, unfeeling bureaucracy. They walked past her alcove without a second glance, their heavy mag boots clanking a rhythm of authority and purpose that felt alien to the quiet hum of the station's true heart. The outpost was a marvel of deep earth engineering, a mining and research facility designed to extract the incredibly rare isotope, Kyanite-3, from the moon's core. The isotope was the key to next-generation FTL drives, a substance so volatile and precious that it justified burrowing into the heart of a moon notorious for its tectonic instability. The Marines were here to guard the prize. The engineers were here to keep the machine running. Elara Vance was here to listen to the mountain. For days, she had been tracking a subtle, harmonic dissonance, a vibration so faint it was lost in the background noise for the station's standard seismic sensors. It was a wrong note in the deep, slow symphony of the rock, a discordant hum that spoke of accumulating stress. The mountain was tightening its grip. She traced a particularly dense cluster of hairline fractures on the holo display, her brow furrowed in concentration. The data flowed into her, a cascade of numbers and waveforms that she processed with a calm, unnerving speed. She felt the pressure in her own bones, a phantom weight that mirrored the kilotons of rock above. The manufactured peace of the command center was shattered by a voice that was not part of the station's hum. It was a voice like a blunt instrument designed to hammer home authority. "Report, Sector Gamma, what's the status on that power fluctuation?" Sergeant Major Thorne strode into the operations hub as if he owned it, his posture a declaration of dominance. He was a large man, his uniform stretched taut over a barrel chest and thick arms. His face was a mask of perpetual dissatisfaction, etched with the lines of a man who believed discipline was the only solution to any problem. He was the senior enlisted man on Kyanos, the alpha predator in this small, enclosed ecosystem, and he moved with the certainty of a man who had never had his authority seriously questioned. His gaze swept the room, a drill instructor's inspection that made technicians sit up straighter and focus on their screens with renewed intensity. He was a relic of a different kind of warfare, a man of fire and maneuver, adrift in a world of data and algorithms. He understood threats you could shoot, enemies you could see. The invisible, existential threat of the mountain itself was an abstraction he held in contempt. To him, the geologists and specialists were just civilians playing with charts, while his Marines, his warriors, did the real work of standing guard. His eyes landed on Alara's alcove, a pocket of quiet contemplation that seemed to offend his very nature. He detoured from his path, his boots ringing with purpose on the metal deck. He stopped just behind her, looming. She did not flinch, did not acknowledge his presence. Her focus was absolute, her world contained within the glowing hologram. Thorne stared at the complex, shifting display, his expression a mixture of scorn and suspicion. "Dr. Vance," he said, the title a subtle jab, a reminder of her civilian status. "Still staring at your pretty pictures?" Alara's fingers paused their dance in the air. She slowly turned her head, her calm, analytical gaze meeting his. There was no defiance in her eyes, no fear, simply a quiet assessment. It was the look of a scientist observing a particularly loud and predictable phenomenon. "Sergeant Major," she replied, her voice soft, almost a whisper, yet it carried with perfect clarity in the hushed space. "I am monitoring a cascading stress event in the H7 strata. The resonance frequency has shifted by 0.03% in the last hour." Thorne grunted, a sound of dismissal. "In English, Doctor, is the big rock going to fall on our heads, yes or no?" His tone was mocking, designed to belittle her work in front of the junior technicians who were now surreptitiously watching the exchange. "The situation is complex," she stated, turning back to her display. "Simple answers are a luxury we don't have." "What I don't have is time for academic nonsense," Thorne shot back, his voice rising. "This is a military installation, Doctor. Everyone here has a function, a purpose. You will file your reports through the proper channels. You will not distract my personnel with ghost stories. Is that understood?" He was marking his territory, establishing the pecking order. Her quiet competence was a challenge to his loud authority, and he could not abide it. "My function," Alara said, her eyes still on the flowing data, "is to ensure the structural integrity of this outpost. The channels are irrelevant when physics are in play." A muscle twitched in Thorne's jaw. He was a man accustomed to immediate, unquestioning obedience. Her calm, factual resistance was like sand in the gears of his worldview. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a menacing growl. "You are a civilian contractor on my station. You will remember that. You answer to me." He tapped a thick finger on the frame of her console for emphasis, a gesture of ownership. "File your report, that's an order." He turned and stalked away, the force of his personality leaving a wake of tension in the air. The technicians quickly looked back at their screens, not wanting to be caught in the crossfire. One of them, a young comms specialist named Corporal Jian Li, glanced over at Alara's alcove with a look of troubled curiosity. He had seen the intensity of her focus, the sheer volume of data she was processing. He was a man of numbers himself, and he recognized a pattern seeker when he saw one. He didn't know what she was looking for, but he had a sinking feeling that it was real and that Sergeant Major Thorne had just ordered them all to ignore it. Alara showed no reaction to the confrontation. She was already gone, her consciousness submerged once more in the silent, screaming language of the stone. The Sergeant Major's words were just noise, fading into the background hum. The mountain, however, was speaking more clearly than ever, and it was telling her they were running out of time. The anomaly she was tracking was not just a passive buildup of stress anymore. It was developing a pulse, a rhythm. The harmonic dissonance was organizing, focusing. On her display, she modeled the wave propagation, her algorithms painting a grim picture. The stress was converging on a critical structural point, the primary geothermal regulator manifold. It was the station's heart, and also its most volatile component, a massive piece of machinery that vented excess heat and pressure from the deep earth tap. If it failed, the resulting plasma release would flash boil every drop of water in the surrounding rock, turning kilometers of granite into a steam-powered cannon aimed directly at the outpost. Her own systems, the advanced sensors she had calibrated herself, gave her a 98.7% probability of a containment breach within the next 12 minutes if the harmonic stress was not vented. The station's standard systems, however, were blind to it. They measured gross seismic shifts, not the subtle, insidious language of resonance. To them, everything was green. To Alara, the world was screaming red. She stood up, her movements economical and precise. There was no time to write a report, no time to argue with a man who valued protocol over survival. She needed to manually initiate a controlled pressure release from the regulator, a delicate procedure that would bleed off the focused energy and restore equilibrium. The control interface for such a critical system was, by necessity, locked down behind multiple layers of security. Military-grade security. Thorne's security. Alara walked from her alcove to the main engineering console at the center of the operations hub. The technician on duty, a nervous man named Kale, looked up as she approached. "Ma'am, can I help you?" "I need access to the geothermal regulation controls," she said, her tone flat and urgent. Kale paled slightly. "Ma'am, that's a level 1 lockdown. Only the station commander or Sergeant Major Thorne can authorize that." "There's no time," she stated simply. She reached past him, her fingers flying across the holographic interface, pulling up the security protocol screen. It was a complex matrix of encrypted passkeys and biometric locks, a wall designed to stop spies and saboteurs. To Alara, it was just another system, another set of rules to be understood and bypassed. Her hands moved with a blur, not hacking in the conventional sense, but navigating the system's own logic against itself, finding the back doors left by its designers, the emergency overrides that she herself had recommended in her initial design brief for facilities like this. "Ma'am, you can't do that," Kale stammered, half rising from his chair. "I'll be court-martialed. Sergeant Major Thorne will—" His protest was cut short by a familiar, booming voice that echoed across the deck. "What in the hell do you think you're doing?" Thorne was standing not 10 feet away, his face contorted in a mask of pure fury. He had seen her bypass the duty officer and begin manipulating a primary control board. To his mind, it was an act of open insurrection, a civilian seizing control of a military system. He marched forward, his presence sucking the air out of the room. 2 hulking Marines, his personal shadows, moved to flank him. "Step away from that console, now," Thorne commanded, his voice low and dangerous. Alara did not look at him. Her eyes were fixed on the interface, a cascade of decryption keys scrolling past. A final barrier appeared, a query demanding command-level authorization. She had 2 choices: spend another 40 seconds breaking the encryption, or find another way. She chose the latter, her mind instantly rerouting her plan to a physical bypass at a sub-level junction. But to do that, she needed to get past Thorne. He moved to block her path, planting himself directly in front of her. He was a wall of angry muscle. "I gave you an order, Doctor. Who in God's name do you think you are?" The entire operations hub had fallen silent. Every eye was on them. It was a public challenge, a final assertion of his dominance. Corporal Lee watched from his comm station, his face a knot of anxiety. He could see the timer on Alara's abandoned display counting down. Thorne jabbed a finger toward her face. "You are a civilian. You have no authority here. You do not touch my equipment. You do not override my protocols. Every action on this station requires clearance. It requires authorization." He leaned in, his voice a furious whisper that was louder than a shout. "And who cleared you?" the sergeant major yelled, the question exploding into the tense silence. "Who cleared you to take over my command center?" Alara finally looked up from the console, her gaze lifting to meet his. Her expression was unreadable, a placid sea in the face of his storm. The timer on her screen ticked past the 10-minute mark. The deep hum of the station seemed to falter for a fraction of a second, a skipped heartbeat that only she could feel. She held his furious gaze for a long moment. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. Then she spoke. Her voice was not loud. It was not emotional. It was a simple, declarative statement of fact, delivered with the chilling calm of absolute certainty. "I cleared myself." The words hung in the air, utterly incomprehensible to Thorne's rigid, hierarchical mind. It was not a confession. It was not a justification. It was a declaration of a different kind of authority, one that did not derive from rank or title, but from necessity and competence. It was the voice of the storm telling the weatherman it did not need his permission to exist. Thorne was stunned into momentary silence. His brain, so accustomed to the binary logic of orders given and orders obeyed, could not process the statement. It was as if a cog in a machine had declared itself the engine. His face cycled through a rapid series of emotions: rage, disbelief, and then a deeper, more profound fury at this utter rejection of his entire world. Before he could formulate a response, a low, grinding shudder ran through the entire outpost. It was not the familiar tremor of settling rock. This was a deeper, more violent groan. Lights flickered. A metallic shriek echoed from deep within the station structure. On a nearby monitor, a dozen secondary alarms began to flash yellow. It was exactly what she had predicted, a pre-shockwave from the harmonic buildup. It was minor, but it was undeniable. The shudder broke the spell. Kale, The technician looked from the flashing alarms back to Alara with wide, terrified eyes. Corporal Lee was already on his feet, looking at her not as a civilian, but as the only person who had known this was coming. Alara took advantage of Thorne's momentary paralysis. She didn't run. She simply stepped around him, her movements fluid and purposeful, and headed for the emergency access hatch that led to the sublevels. "The manifold's primary control is locked," she said to no one in particular, her voice a calm current in the rising tide of panic. "I'm initiating a manual vent at the secondary conduit." Thorne finally snapped out of his stupor. "Seize her!" he roared at his Marines. "She's sabotaging the station!" But his order was a fraction too late. The world dissolved into chaos. A deafening explosion ripped through the station from the outer perimeter, a sound so violent it was felt more than heard. It was not a single blast, but a rapid series of them, like a string of monstrous firecrackers. The deck plates bucked violently, throwing men from their feet. Red emergency lighting bathed the command center in a hellish glow as the main power grid failed, replaced by the screaming whine of backup generators. On the main tactical display, a dozen new icons bloomed into existence. They were not ships in the void above. They were deep inside the rock, moving with impossible speed, converging on Kyanos. They were being attacked from within the mountain itself. The enemy was a swarm of automated burrowing drones, nicknamed termites. They didn't use conventional explosives to breach hulls. Their weapons were far more insidious. They attached to the bedrock surrounding a target and fired synchronized seismic charges, designed not to destroy the facility directly, but to manipulate the natural stresses of the geology, to turn the environment itself into the weapon. They were designed to trigger a resonance cascade, a geological kill. They were ringing the outpost like a bell, and the vibrations were designed to shatter it. The outpost screamed. A section of the outer corridor collapsed in a plume of rock dust and twisted metal, the screech of tortured steel echoing over the comms. Alarms blared in a cacophony of synthetic terror. "Breach in Sector Delta! We have a hull breach!" a panicked voice shouted over the net. "Negative! The rock just gave way!" Sergeant Major Thorne, thrown to the deck by the first shockwave, was back on his feet instantly. The confusion and fury on his face were replaced by the mask of a combat leader. This, at least, was a language he understood. An attack. An enemy. He was back in his element. "All hands, battle stations!" he bellowed, his voice a rallying cry in the chaos. "Seal the breaches. Defensive perimeters at all major junctions. I want fire teams laying down suppression on those entry points." His orders were crisp, textbook, and utterly useless. Corporal Lee, clinging to his console to stay upright, stared at the tactical display. "Sir," he yelled over the din, "they're not coming through the breaches. They're still outside. They're just shaking us apart." "Then shoot at the rock," Thorne roared back, his mind refusing to accept the reality of the situation. "I want heavy repeaters firing into those breach points. Make them pay for every inch." In Sector Delta, a fire team of Marines did just that. They set up a heavy machine gun and poured a stream of high-velocity rounds into the gaping hole where a corridor used to be. The bullets sparked and ricocheted uselessly against the exposed rock face. As they fired, another seismic pulse, perfectly timed, hit the station. The rock around the breach didn't explode, it liquefied. A slurry of superheated rock and gravel poured into the corridor, burying the fire team in an instant. Their screams were mercifully short. Thorne's methods were failing, and they were getting his men killed. He was trying to fight an earthquake with bullets. He stood in the center of the command hub, his hands clenched into fists, his face a mask of grim determination as he issued more orders, each one more futile than the last. Reroute power to forward shields. Vent atmosphere at the breach to create a pressure barrier. I need damage control teams on site yesterday. He was throwing every conventional tactic he had at an unconventional enemy, and the enemy wasn't even listening. The station was a ship sinking in a stormy sea, and its captain was ordering the crew to shoot at the waves. The shaking grew more violent, more rhythmic. The pulses were coming faster now, building on each other. A deep, resonant hum filled the air, a vibration that made teeth ache and vision blur. It was the sound of trillions of tons of rock beginning to sing in a chorus of destruction. On the main engineering display, the structural integrity fields flickered, dropping from 80% to 60%, then 40%. The outpost was tearing itself apart. Thorne's face was pale in the red emergency light, his confident roar shrinking to a strained shout. He was a man of action, rendered impotent. His world of clear commands and direct results had crumbled around him, leaving only the terrifying, unanswerable physics of the situation. The arrogance that had defined him was cracking, revealing the raw fear and confusion beneath. He was losing. In the midst of the escalating pandemonium, a new voice cut through the comms. It wasn't loud, it wasn't panicked. It was the calm, clear voice of Alara Vance. She had made her way to a secondary comms panel in an engineering substation, patching her audio feed directly into the command channel. The entire station heard her. All personnel, cease defensive actions. They are ineffective and accelerating structural fatigue. Her voice was an island of stillness in the ocean of noise. For a moment, the sheer contrast was enough to make people pause. "Sergeant Major," she continued, her tone clinical, "your tactics are based on a flawed premise. The threat is not the drones. It is the harmonic resonance they are inducing in the H7 stratum. You are fighting the symptom, not the cause." Thorne spun around, searching for the source of the voice. "Vance, I will have you shot for mutiny. Shut down her comms," he roared at Lee. But Corporal Lee was staring at his own screen, where he had managed to pull up the data Alara had been viewing earlier. He could now see the waves she had seen, a terrifying visualization of the energy converging on them. He did not move to cut her off. Alara's voice continued, unflustered. "The enemy is using a phased seismic array. They have found the primary resonance frequency of this massif. The pulses are building to a final, catastrophic cascade. Based on the current energy curve, we have approximately 90 seconds until the core structure of Outpost Kyanos experiences total mechanical failure." As she spoke, she managed to slave her personal data stream to the main holotank in the command center. The tactical map of Marines and breaches vanished, replaced by her terrifyingly beautiful visualization. It was a 3D model of the outpost, suspended in a sea of glowing energy waves. The waves, depicted in a lurid crimson, were pulsing in perfect sync, growing in amplitude with each beat, their crests converging on the station's central habitat ring. It was a death warrant written in the language of physics. The sight stunned the command center into a new kind of silence. The blaring alarms were still there, the groaning of the station was still there, but the human noise of panic and shouted orders died away. They were all staring at the image of their own impending doom. "There is a solution," Alara's voice announced. Every head snapped up. Hope, a commodity that had vanished moments before, flickered back into existence. "It is counterintuitive," she warned. "We cannot stop the resonance. but we may be able to redirect it. We can use the station's own systems to generate a counter-resonance, a phase-inverted harmonic wave. If I can time it perfectly, we can create a null field, forcing the destructive energy to flow around the station instead of through it. Thorn finally found his voice, a strangled cry of disbelief and rage. "That's insane! You'll destroy us! You'll overload the core!" He turned to the men around him, his eyes wild. "Are you going to listen to this mad woman? I am in command. Follow my orders." But no one was looking at him anymore. They were looking at the hologram, at the undeniable truth of their situation. They had felt the failure of Thorn's methods in their bones, heard it in the screams of their comrades over the comms. His authority had been built on a promise of security, a promise that was now visibly, demonstrably broken. Ilara Vance was offering not a promise, but a calculation, a chance. In that moment, the entire social structure of Outpost Kayanos inverted. Rank became meaningless. Protocol became a suicide pact. The only thing that mattered was competence. Corporal Jian Li was the first to act. He turned away from Thorn, his fingers flying over his console as he established a direct, secure link to Ilara's substation. "Ma'am," he said, his voice steady and clear, his declaration echoing throughout the command center and across the station's comms. "Corporal Li here. My board is yours. What do you need?" That was the turning point. The dam broke. One by one, other technicians turned to their own consoles, their voices joining a chorus of newfound allegiance. "Engineering standing by. Environmental, ready for your command. Power distribution, awaiting instructions." They had abandoned their sergeant major. Not out of malice, but out of the simple, primal instinct to survive. Authority did not belong to the man with the loudest voice or the most stripes on his sleeve. It belonged to the person with the answer. In the heart of a dying mountain, a quiet civilian analyst had just become the commander of Outpost Kayanos. Thorn stood alone in the center of the room, his face a ruin of shattered authority, a king suddenly finding himself without a kingdom. The ghost had taken command. "Corporal Li," Ilara's voice came back, sharp and immediate, devoid of any triumph. It was the voice of a surgeon at the beginning of a complex operation. "I need you to bypass the safety interlocks on the primary plasma conduits, all 12 of them. Authorize a full system energy dump on my mark." Li's eyes widened. A full system dump was an emergency procedure of last resort, designed to prevent a reactor core breach by venting raw plasma into the surrounding rock. It would cripple the station for weeks. "Ma'am, that will fuse the entire conduit network." "The network is irrelevant if we are a crater," she replied coolly. "Do it." Li nodded, his fingers flying. The red warning icon for the conduit safeties on his board blinked and then turned a steady, ominous green. He had just overridden one of the most fundamental safety systems on the station. "Engineering," Ilara commanded, her voice moving to the next piece on the board. "I need you to reroute all auxiliary power to the structural integrity field emitters, but invert their polarity. Instead of reinforcing the hull, I want them to generate a high-frequency vibration. I'm sending you the exact frequency now. It must be precise to within 5 decimal places." "Inverting polarity, ma'am," the engineering chief replied, his voice tight with disbelief. "That will actively weaken the superstructure." "Yes," Ilara confirmed. "We are not trying to be a wall. We are going to be a tuning fork. Match the frequency. Now." The plan was terrifying in its elegance. She wasn't going to fight the wave. She was going to join the dance. By turning the station itself into a source of vibration, she could manipulate the final, catastrophic wave front, twisting it, bending it. But the timing had to be perfect. The energy release had to be exact. A fraction of a second too early, and they would amplify the destructive wave, annihilating themselves. A fraction too late, and the effort would be wasted. She was balancing the life of the station on the edge of a razor made of mathematics. From her substation, she had a direct feed from her custom seismic sensors. She watched the crimson waves on her personal display, not as a picture, but as raw data. The final cascade was beginning. The enemy drones fired their last, most powerful seismic charge in perfect unison. A monster wave of pure kinetic energy, the combined force of a dozen tactical nuclear weapons, was now propagating through the rock, hurtling toward them. 40 seconds to impact, she announced, her voice a chilling metronome. Lee, confirm conduit safeties are bypassed. Confirmed, ma'am. We are green for a full system dump. Engineering, confirm polarity inversion and frequency lock. Frequency locked, ma'am. The whole station is humming like a guitar string. Structural integrity is dropping fast, down to 20%. The outpost groaned around them, a deep, agonizing sound of metal and rock under unbearable stress. Dust and ceiling panels rained down in the command center. Thorne had sunk into a chair, his head in his hands, a silent, defeated observer of a battle he could not comprehend. 20 seconds, Alara's voice counted down. She was no longer just reading data, she was feeling it. She could feel the approaching wave as a pressure in the air, a vibration in her teeth. Her mind was a supercomputer, modeling the wave's velocity, its energy decay curve, its interaction with the heterogeneous layers of rock it was passing through. 10, 9, 8. She had to time the plasma release, not for the wave's impact on the station, but for the moment it hit a specific layer of dense anorthosite 500 meters out. The change in medium would slightly alter the wave's phase. That was the moment of vulnerability. That was the point she had to strike. 7, 6, 5. Her world narrowed to a single, flashing number on her screen, the real-time distance of the wave's leading edge. Engineering, bring emitters to maximum power, now! A new, high-pitched whine filled the air as the structural fields reversed their function, vibrating the entire station at an impossible frequency. The groaning of the structure intensified into a terrifying shriek. 4, 3. The wavefront hit the anorthosite layer. On her display, she saw the phase shift, a flicker of data that lasted less than a millisecond. It was time. Lee, she commanded, her voice utterly calm. Execute. Executing, Lee yelled, slamming his hand down on the holographic control. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, with a sound like the sky tearing in half, the 12 primary plasma conduits vented their entire energy reserves into the rock. 12 lances of pure white-hot energy, hotter than the surface of a sun, stabbed into the mountain. The effect was instantaneous. The rock in the path of the plasma didn't melt, it sublimated, turning directly from solid to gas in a violent, explosive expansion. It was a controlled, man-made earthquake, perfectly timed and perfectly aimed. This new, artificial shockwave, born from the station's own heart, erupted outwards, colliding with the enemy's destructive wave. It was a collision of physics, a battle fought in the medium of solid rock. On Alara's display, the two waveforms met. The angry crimson of the hostile wave and the brilliant blue of their counter-wave overlapped. For a terrifying instant, they amplified each other, and a shudder so violent it felt like the hand of God shook the station, throwing everyone and everything to the floor. The lights died completely, plunging them into absolute darkness, the scream of the emitters and the roar of the plasma fading into an even more terrifying silence. And then nothing. The silence was absolute, not the false silence of the station's life support, but a true, profound, deafening stillness. The shaking had stopped. The groaning had stopped. The alarms were dead. There was only the darkness, the smell of ozone, and the sound of ragged human breathing. For a long, stretched-out moment, no one moved. They were suspended in a state of shock, unsure if they were alive or dead, if the silence was salvation, or the prelude to a final, catastrophic collapse. Then, with a flicker and a hum, the emergency backup power rerouted and the dim red lights came back on. The command center was a wreck. Consoles were shattered, panels hung from the ceiling by wires, and a thick layer of dust covered everything. But it was intact. The walls were standing. They were alive. On the main holotank, Ilara's display flickered back to life. The crimson wave was gone. In its place, two smaller, weaker waves of a neutral green were propagating away from the station, their energy dissipating harmlessly into the deep rock. She had not blocked the attack. She had split it, bent it, and steered it around them like water flowing around a stone in a stream. The enemy drones, their primary weapon rendered impotent and their seismic sensors fried by the plasma discharge, were now just inert lumps of metal entombed in kilometers of solid rock. The threat was neutralized. A ragged cheer went up from the technicians. It was a weak, exhausted sound, but it was a sound of victory. Men and women picked themselves up, looking at each other with dazed, incredulous expressions. They had stared into the abyss, and a quiet woman with a mastery of numbers had pulled them back. Corporal Lee stared at the screen, a slow smile spreading across his face. He keyed his comm. "Ma'am, Dr. Vance, status." Her voice came back, as calm as ever, though he could hear the slight strain of exhaustion in it now. "The cascade has been averted. Structural integrity is at 19%, but holding. The primary threat is neutralized." She paused. "I recommend we begin immediate station-wide damage assessment. Work. Always the work." Lee shook his head in awe. It was then that another system, one long thought dormant, flickered to life on the main screen. It was a comm channel, one reserved for the highest echelons of command, a quantum-entangled link that bypassed all local relays and spoke directly to Earth-based high command. Its activation code hadn't been used since the station was commissioned. The face that appeared on the screen was that of a woman in her late 60s, her gray hair pulled back in a severe bun. She wore the uniform of a 4-star general, but it was her eyes that commanded attention. They were chips of ice, sharp and intelligent, and they seemed to see everything. She was General Anya Madsen, head of the apocryphally named Advanced Projects Directorate. Her gaze swept over the ruined command center, taking in the scene with a cold, analytical appraisal. Her eyes did not linger on the debris. They did not linger on the exhausted technicians. They completely ignored Sergeant Major Thorne, who was slowly getting to his feet, a dazed, broken man. Her gaze found the small, grainy camera feed from Ilara's engineering substation and locked onto it. "Dr. Vance," General Madsen said, her voice crisp and clear, cutting through the lingering haze of the room. "Report." It was not a request. It was a demand for data from one professional to another. Before Alara could reply, Thorne stumbled forward. This was his last chance to salvage some shred of his authority, to reinsert himself into the chain of command. "General," he began, his voice raspy. "Sergeant Major Thorne, station commander. We were attacked by an unknown hostile force. This civilian contractor interfered with military operations, seized control of station systems, and—" Madsen cut him off with a look so cold it could have frozen plasma. She did not raise her voice. She did not have to. "I was not addressing you, Sergeant Major. Your designation here is Chief of Security, not Station Commander, a fact you seem to have forgotten. I have the full event log, every order you gave, every life you wasted." She shifted her gaze slightly, addressing the room at large. "Corporal Lee, you will provide the report." Lee, startled at being addressed by a 4-star general, snapped to attention. "Yes, General," he gave a concise, factual, and utterly damning account of the last hour. He described Thorne's futile orders, the loss of the fire team in Sector Delta, and the rising panic. Then he described Alara's intervention, her diagnosis of the problem, her counterintuitive commands, and the final, terrifying moments of the counter-resonance gambit. He left out no detail. It was a testament to failure and a testament to genius. When he finished, the silence in the room was absolute. General Madsen listened without expression, her gaze still fixed on Alara's feed. "Thank you, Corporal," she said. Then her icy eyes moved, finally settling on Thorne. "Sergeant Major Thorne," she began, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous tone. "You are a decorated soldier. You have served this command for 30 years with distinction in conventional theaters. But you were placed here to provide security for an asset, not to command it. Your arrogance, your willful ignorance of the operational parameters of this facility, and your primitive reliance on doctrine in the face of an unconventional threat directly resulted in the near loss of Project Chimera and the deaths of at least 4 Marines." "Project Chimera?" Thorne whispered, the name unfamiliar. "This outpost," Madsen clarified, her voice dripping with contempt, "is the most advanced piece of geostructural engineering ever created. Its value is not the kyanite it mines. Its value is the station itself. It is a research platform, a weapon, and you almost broke it because you couldn't stand the idea of a civilian being smarter than you." Thorne's face, already pale, turned ashen. He tried to speak, to defend himself, but no words came out. In a final, desperate act of a dying ego, he gestured weakly toward Alara's image on the screen. "But who is she?" he stammered, his voice cracking. "What right does she have? She has no rank, no authority. Who cleared her?" It was the same question he had screamed at her earlier. Then it had been a challenge. Now it was a pathetic plea for an explanation, for a world that made sense again. General Madsen allowed a flicker of something, not quite a smile, but a grim satisfaction, to touch her lips. She looked at Thorne as if he were a particularly slow child. "Sergeant Major, authority is not always a function of rank. Sometimes it is a function of creation." She paused, letting the weight of her next words settle before she even spoke them. "That is Dr. Alara Vance. She is the lead architect of the Chimera project. She wrote the algorithms that balance this station's power core. She designed the structural integrity fields you tried to use as shields. She personally calibrated the seismic sensors your own technicians couldn't even read. This isn't her station because she's assigned to it. It's her station because she conceived of it, designed it, and built it. Madsen leaned slightly closer to her camera, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that every person in the room could hear. Her clearance isn't granted by a sergeant major, or even by me. It is inherent. On every matter related to the physics and structural integrity of Outpost Kaianos, Dr. Alara Vance is the final, absolute, and unquestionable authority. She doesn't need to be cleared. She is the clearance. The revelation landed with the force of a physical blow. The quiet, unassuming woman in the gray jumpsuit was not just another egghead. She was the god of this entire machine, the creator. Thorne stared at the screen, his mouth agape. The entire foundation of his world turned to dust. The Marines who had been prepared to arrest her now looked at her image with a profound, terrifying awe. They had not just been saved by a genius. They had been saved by the architect of their entire world, a person who understood every bolt, every wire, every molecule of the rock they were in. "Sergeant Major Thorne," Madsen said, her voice returning to its official, steely tone. "You are hereby relieved of your duties. You are confined to your quarters under guard. A tribunal will convene upon your return to high command. Corporal Lee, you will see to it." Lee, stunned but resolute, nodded. "Yes, General." He motioned to the two Marines who had once been Thorne's shadows. Their expressions were grim. They understood. They flanked the disgraced Sergeant Major, their loyalty transferred as cleanly and efficiently as power between grids. Thorne did not resist. He was a hollow man, his authority, his pride, his very identity stripped from him in the space of a few sentences. He allowed himself to be led away, his heavy boots scuffing silently on the dusty deck. With the internal conflict resolved, a new order began to settle over the command center. It was a quieter order, more focused. The remaining technicians and officers moved with a new purpose. Their actions no longer dictated by the bark of a superior, but by the quiet logic of the situation. They began running diagnostics, assessing damage, their movements efficient and collaborative. And at the center of their new universe was the small, grainy image of Alara Vance on the comm screen. She had not watched Thorne's humiliation. She had not acknowledged her own vindication. The moment Madsen finished speaking, Alara had turned back to her work, her display once again filled with the complex data of the station's status. She was already immersed in the next problem, stabilizing the damaged power grid, assessing the microfractures caused by the counter-resonance, planning the long, arduous process of repair. The human drama was, to her, just more noise in the signal. The mission was all that mattered. Later, after the immediate crisis was managed and the station was in a stable, if crippled, state, Corporal Lee made his way to the engineering substation where Alara was still working. The place was a mess of sparking conduits and dangling wires, but she had cleared a small space for herself, her holographic display casting its serene blue light in the surrounding chaos. He hesitated at the doorway, unsure what to say. "Thank you," felt inadequate. "You were right," felt insulting. He carried 2 mugs of a hot, nutrient-rich paste that passed for coffee on Kaianos. He held one out to her. "Thought you might need this, ma'am," he said quietly. Alara looked up, her eyes slowly refocusing from the world of data to the human being in front of her. She took the mug, her fingers wrapping around its warmth. "Thank you, Corporal." Lee lingered for a moment, gathering his courage. It wasn't praise he wanted to offer, but respect, the respect of one professional for another. The harmonic cascade, he began, his voice barely above a whisper. The phase inversion calculation. I ran the logs. You did it in less than 3 seconds after the final wave launched. The station's own tactical computers would have taken 10 minutes to model that. How? Alara took a sip from the mug, her gaze distant for a moment, as if replaying the event. The station's computers were trying to solve the problem, she said simply. I wasn't. I already knew the answer. She looked at him, a flicker of something akin to connection in her eyes. You understood the energy curve. You didn't question the conduit dump. You acted. It was the highest praise she was capable of giving. It was an acknowledgement of his own competence. Lee felt a warmth spread through his chest that had nothing to do with the hot drink. Just following the data, ma'am, he replied. He gave a small, respectful nod and left her to her work, feeling as if he had just spoken to something more than a person. Days turned into weeks. A relief crew arrived, along with a new security chief, a quiet, professional captain who deferred to Dr. Vance on all technical matters without question. The legend of the incident spread through the station, whispered in mess halls and maintenance corridors. They called it the tuning. They spoke of the quiet woman who had commanded the mountain, who had argued with physics and won. She was no longer a ghost. She was a presence, a force. People gave her a wide berth, not out of fear, but out of a deep, abiding awe. Then, one day, a long-range shuttle docked with the station. Her work was done. The station was stable. The repairs were mapped out. Alara Vance packed nothing because she had brought nothing but the clothes she wore and the knowledge in her head. She walked to the docking bay, her footsteps making no sound. Corporal Lee was there to see her off, a silent, solitary honor guard. He saluted. She gave him a slight nod, a gesture of mutual respect, and then she was gone, disappearing into the transport as quietly as she had arrived. She left behind a functioning outpost and a humbled hierarchy. She left behind a story that would be told for years, a cautionary tale for the arrogant and an inspiration for the competent. But most of all, she left behind a profound silence, the silence of a mountain that had been taught a new song. They had built their world on rules of rank and power, a fragile artifice of human ego. She had reminded them that other, older laws were always in effect, the laws of stress and pressure, of frequency and resonance. She was not a soldier or a commander. She was a natural law unto herself, a quiet professional who moved through the world not by permission, but by necessity, her authority derived from the simple, unassailable fact that she was right.